Here we go. Okay. Okay, I can't see anyone now, so I'm just going to trust that everyone's there. So yeah, so as Maryam said, I'm from Cape Mental Health, and today I'm going to be presenting on our Access to Justice program. And within that program, we have sort of two components. One is the SAVE program, and the other one is our clients in conflict with the law. So I'm going to be presenting on both. The first one being the SAVE program. So SAVE stands for Sexual Abuse Victim Empowerment Program. And that program was initiated in 1990 following a request from prosecutors at Wynberg Court. So they had noticed an increased number of cases coming through where the complainants had an intellectual disability. And at that point, the cases weren't going anywhere. So they approached Cape Mental Health to see if there was something that we could do to assist. And at the time, we had a psychologist employed named Beverly Dickman. I actually saw that she's on our Zoom conference today. And so together they came up with an outline of the SAVE program. And so the goal was to ensure that justice was pursued in cases where people with intellectual disabilities are complainants of sexual abuse. Initially, there were only about 100 cases that came through in the first 10 years, but that gradually increased. And so we also had to hire more staff to assist. And also the nature of the assessments can be quite taxing. And so we needed some extra psychologists to assist with all the cases. So since then, we've also extended our services to persons with psychosocial disability who've been sexually abused. We get a few dual diagnoses, but not too many referrals where it's just a psychosocial disability. So this is our SAVE team. This photo was taken a while ago, and so we've since lost one or two of our psychologists. But nonetheless, we usually have about 5 psychologists, and then myself as the program manager. And then all of our case management is done by our Cape Mental Health social workers. So they really manage the cases from referral all the way through to court preparation and afterwards. So just a snapshot of SAVE for the 2019-2020 financial year. We had a total of 127 psycho-legal assessments that were done for that year. So that includes the assessment and the report written for courts. We received about 56 subpoenas. However, not all of them resulted in the psychologists going to testify. We do often have a lot of cases that are postponed. And then we supported 383 complainants and their families throughout that financial year. So looking at the demographic profile of beneficiaries, we have seen an increase in referrals for male complainants, but it's still predominantly female complainants that come through. And in terms of the racial demographic, it's colored individuals, and then African, and then white individuals. And again, we have seen an increase in the number of rural referrals, but mainly we're still seeing complainants from urban areas. In terms of the role of our psychologists, so their role is to assess the client's level of intellectual functioning or current functioning. They assess their capacity to act as a witness to testify in court, the ability to consent to sexual intercourse, so that will be questions surrounding their sexual knowledge, and then the impact of the alleged assault on the client. So we do have a bit of a gap in service in terms of statement taking, because we often get asked to take statements from the complainant. And this often happens where the investigating officer or the forensic social worker doesn't feel that they have the skills to be able to take a statement from a person. But unfortunately, that's not what our psychologists, that's not their role within the SAVE program. I'll talk about it a bit later, but that's where our training comes in. So after they've done the assessment, they then need to place this person within the definition as given by the Sexual Offences Act. So I'm not going to read this out because it's quite a lot, but basically they need to place them within this so that their reports will stand up in court. They would also need to observe the appearance and behavior of the person at assessment. So this will be looking at whether there's any obvious signs of disability. After interacting with the client for a couple of minutes, is it picked up that this person might have an intellectual disability, looking at emotional responses within the assessment. And these could be useful for advocating for an intermediary and for advocating that the person doesn't testify in open court. So after they've, as I said, after they've done the assessment, they'll write up the report for court, and they will then act as an expert witness to prepare the court for the victim. So they will go in before the victim testifies to explain their report, explain their findings in the assessment, and then to also talk about accommodations that this person may need in order to testify. So looking at the role of our Cape Mental Health social workers, so as I said earlier, they are the case managers. They ensure that our clients receive a comprehensive service. So it's not just about the assessment that gets done. We have quite a long waiting list at times. And so from the point of referral to when they see a psychologist can be a couple of months. And so the social worker then starts managing the case from referral, so that they can check on the client, check on their safety, make sure that the family is supported. This is especially important if the accused is a neighbor or a family member, because often the accused does get bail. So they would need to make sure that the client is safe. They would refer to relevant organizations if necessary. They will inform the family of what the process is to follow, prepare them for their SAVE assessments. Sometimes the clients and their families think that Cape Mental Health is the court, and so when they come for assessment and they haven't had a chance to be prepared, for example, if it's a rural client, they think that they're coming to court, and that can be quite anxiety provoking. So that's why it's important for the social workers to prepare the client for what the SAVE assessment is about. They also have regular contact with the client throughout the whole process. They check in with the investigative officer to make sure that they don't miss any consultations with the prosecutors, and also remind them of when the investigating officers need to bring them in for the assessment. Another really important role is court preparation and support. So they would prepare the client before going to court. They would, as far as possible, go with the client to court, to all their court dates, and then also providing support afterwards. So this is obviously important because sometimes the outcome is not always what the family and the clients hope for. Sometimes the case does get withdrawn, sometimes the accused is acquitted, and so it's about providing support and debriefing for after the court process has been completed. So some challenges within the SAVE program. As I mentioned earlier, we do have a long waiting list. So we are able to do between 120 and 130 assessments a year, but we usually get about 150 to 160 referrals. So that's why we do have a waiting list. And then the investigating officers are responsible for bringing the clients through for their assessments, and they really struggle with access to vehicles at times. So sometimes there's only one vehicle between 3 investigating officers, and the one needs to go to court and the other one needs to do that. And so sometimes there is a last minute rush where a social worker might need to go and fetch the clients to bring them through for their assessment. There are sometimes language barriers between the investigating officers and the clients, and this does make it challenging in terms of statement taking. So, you know, sometimes they assume that it's because of the intellectual disability that this person has that they're not able to give their statement, but sometimes it's actually about language. And then we really would like to do more training with prosecutors, the FCS officers, forensic social workers, and social workers in statutory organizations. It is difficult to do training because it's difficult to get everyone together at the same time. They obviously have very high caseloads themselves and are very busy, and so it's difficult to be able to get them all together so that we can do the training. When we are able to do training, we do cover obviously the SAVE program, but we also cover psychosocial disability and intellectual disability, interviewing a client with intellectual disability, statement taking, etc. So I think that does tie into the question about training that came up in the talk before. And then challenges within the COVID-19 context. So at this point in time, we can't do assessments because all of our assessments are done face-to-face, and we need to make sure that our clients stay safe and that our psychologists stay safe. And we therefore do have a long waiting list for next year. This does have implications for courts because they're waiting long for our assessments. They do sometimes provisionally withdraw the case. So we just have to keep an eye that these cases do go back onto the court roll. And then our rural clients, they are obviously more difficult to screen before they come in for their assessments. And we also need to ensure that when they do start coming through for assessment, that they stay safe, because they usually stay over somewhere. So we need to ensure their safety. So court preparation by the social workers is usually done face-to-face. And so this has been a challenge because we are not able to do that at this time. Usually what would happen is that they would sit down with the client, talk about the court process. They would often take them to the court, introduce them to the various role players, show them what a courtroom looks like, that kind of thing. So at this point in time, we have approached the court preparation officers to put aside some extra time for our clients, explaining that we're not able to do that. And so that has been successful in one or two cases. And we have also shared some information with them about preparing a client with intellectual disability for court. So future considerations, we would love to expand the SAVE program to other areas within the Western Cape, but also to other provinces. The SAPS has heard the call for the need for psychologists to do these assessments, and they have hired 5 new psychologists. We have sent in a training proposal because Cape Mental Health has been doing this for a very long time, and we have a lot of knowledge and skills that we can share. And then to continue to strengthen the SAVE program through training, as I said before. And then more funding for additional assessments in order to reduce the waiting list. So we would hope that our waiting list was only maybe 2 months long. Sometimes it can be up to 6 months long. So it would be really great if we could find more funding to do those additional assessments. So moving on to our second program. So this program is quite new still. And it came up because we obviously noticed that some of our clients, known clients of Cape Mental Health, were coming into conflict with the law, and they needed some extra support for themselves and for their families. So this program basically assists clients with psychosocial and or intellectual disabilities who are in conflict with the law. So it's either known clients of Cape Mental Health or new clients who've been referred for assistance. And the aim is to ensure that the clients have the same access to justice as the general population, but that their psychosocial needs are taken into account. So again, our social workers are our case managers, and the aim is to ensure that the clients have access to their medication. So that's, for example, if they have been arrested and they have been sent to Pollsmoor awaiting trial, to make sure that they are still receiving their medication. To make sure that they do have legal representation. So most of the time families aren't able to pay for a sort of a private lawyer, so they go through legal aid. And that comes with its own challenges because you often find that the legal aid lawyer changes a few times throughout the case. And so some knowledge is lost with that change. And so the Cape Mental Health social worker is able to inform the client, inform the lawyer of the situation with the client, you know, what's happened up until then, and share the information. They're able to ensure that the psycholegal assessment is done, that a referral is done if needed, but most of all to support the client and the family through the process. So obviously, just as our complainants or victims with intellectual disability struggle and have challenges when it comes to the court process, so too do our clients in conflict with the law, and sometimes that is overlooked. So as I was saying, we work with both sides, and generally victims do have better access to accommodations within the court process, but very often the accused is overlooked. And so that's where our social workers come in to advocate and to make sure that their diagnosis is taken into account. So at this point in time, our referrals are received through intake for referrals that are coming from outside of Cape Mental Health. And we've been able to establish a relationship with Pollsmoor Prison. So we've had a few referrals from the psychologists there, which have been really great because often it's a person who's now due for release, and so they go and see the psychologist, and once or twice it has actually only then come to light that actually this person does have an intellectual disability, and so they're able to refer to us to say, can you support the family, can you support the client? And so the social worker will start supporting the family before the client is released from prison, and once the client is released, that support will then be for the client as well. Maybe if it's possible, the client can also join one of our rehabilitation programs. So it's really, really useful to have that connection. In terms of criteria, we do have quite a broad criteria for this program, but we have received 1 or 2 referrals that have not been appropriate because they required very specialized services or skills that our social workers would not be able to take on, and so we unfortunately could not take those referrals. But generally, we would say refer the client, we'll review the situation, and then we'll see whether we would be able to take the client on or not. In terms of existing clients, so the social workers would notify myself as the manager to say this client has come into conflict with the law, and then we would manage the situation from the beginning of the arrest all the way through. That is the end of my presentation. Thank you so much.
Thanks so much, Sarah. And it's great for you to have imparted knowledge to us around this unique program, especially the SAVE program, because you've really helped these victims to become survivors, actually. So thanks for sharing that. I see there's quite a few questions that have come your way. The first one is, what does your court preparation entail when you speak about the court preparation?
So basically, it would start before the client would go to court, and we have a little booklet that we use, which we're actually busy making into easy to read format. So that would mean that our clients would be able to read through it themselves. At this point in time, the social worker goes through the booklet with the client, and then as far as possible, obviously now it's different with COVID, but before, the social worker would take the client to the courts. Sometimes they've already gone because they've had a consultation with the prosecutor, but it's about, saying who the role players are, what's going to happen, this is the courtroom, this is the waiting room, that kind of thing. And then also afterwards, as I said, in terms of debriefing, sometimes it is quite stressful for the clients because they've been prepped for court, they know they're going to go, and then on the day they go, and then for whatever reason it's postponed. So that can also be quite stressful for the clients because they've gotten ready and they've riled themselves up and they're ready to go, and then the case gets postponed. So it's about support, it's about the clients not having to go through it on their own, but also sometimes the families are hesitant to ask questions. And so sometimes the families also feel a bit intimidated by the whole process. And so the social worker is also there to make sure that everyone knows what's going on and if there are any questions that they get addressed. Okay. I'm not sure if I've answered the question.
I hope so. I'm sure they'll comment again if they need to ask further. Now around rural services, we have a comment that there are quite a few challenges that they're experiencing in the rural areas. So there's a question around whether there's any plans for you to extend your services in the rural areas.
So that's kind of where the new psychologists that SAPS has hired sort of comes in. So the difficulty in rural cases is that the psychologists need to be able to go and testify if needed. And so when we go to rural, it's too far for the psychologists to physically travel and go and testify and come back. And our psychologists only work for us 1 day a week. And then they have usually their private practices. And so we wouldn't be able to ask them, okay, can you cancel 3 days of your practice because you need to go and testify in wherever, Beaufort West or wherever it is. So that's where SAPS has now hired their psychologists to be able to do these assessments in the areas that we can't reach. And that's where we also would like to do more training so that we can train the social workers who render services in that area, so they can also have a comprehensive service like they have here. Because in some areas, they just get an assessment and that's it. They don't get other support. They don't get other counseling services or court preparation services. So, yeah.
Those are the challenges. And I think linked into that, there's a question around, obviously we don't know how long COVID-19 will be with us. And I think the impact of COVID on all of our waiting lists is across the platform. So the question is whether you've actually considered using tele-means of assessment in any way.
So we have spoken to our psychologists about, say, for example, Zoom assessments. It is possible. I think the challenge comes in where, this say assessment's done and now it goes to court. And now in court they say, okay, but you didn't actually assess this person face to face, or you didn't, and so there can be some questions that come up in terms of, but how do you know the person answered your assessment by themselves because you weren't there, kind of thing. You weren't physically there. So there are some complications around that. But for when we do go back, we are obviously going to be putting a whole lot of PPE in place and strict protocols and things like that. And we do have a promise, or a commitment rather, from the psychologist to do extra assessments so that we can try and reduce our waiting list as fast as possible, as quickly as possible. So yeah, at the moment it's looking really, really long, but we are hoping that once we do go back, we can really get those assessments going.
Sure. Then a question, are you collaborating in any way with Necro in terms of the SAVE program and clients that are in conflict with the law? Are you in collaboration with Necro at all?
So in terms of clients in conflict with the law, because I think that would be more relevant for Necro. So we have actually had 1 or 2 clients that have gone through Necro programs. We are planning to. I think, as I said, this section of our program, clients in conflict with the law, is still quite new, and so we have ideas of collaborating and things like that. So it definitely is on our radar, and we would like to collaborate with them a little bit more. Yeah.
Sure. And then finally, a question around whether you could expand a little bit more on intermediary services and what that entails.
So, okay, so the intermediary is at court, and so that would be a person who would sit in with the client if they are able to testify. So they would not be testifying in open court at that point. They would be in a special room that has a camera and a microphone, and so that intermediary would be with the client. I think if you would like to know more about that, I think Carol, my deputy, would be better at explaining that. So I'm not sure if I can ask her to assist, or otherwise she can always answer the question on chat.
Okay, no problem. And then apart from the referrals you get from Polesmoor that you already have an existing relationship with, The service for clients in conflict with the law seems to really fit in with what Dr. Malutsi mentioned in the recommended plan regarding preliminary screening, and to assist also in informing the diversion of such clients. Have you got any comments on that?
Yes, definitely. So, as I said before, it's still quite new. We only just started getting it going, and then COVID happened. So we do. It's at the moment, it's more sort of word of mouth that it's been. That we've informed people, places like Paulsmoor, and I think there was also part of a correctional facility where we also got a referral from. But it does definitely fit in with that, and obviously the community-based services, and if someone has already gone through the system and is now being released, I think we would be really well positioned to support them so that they don't come into conflict with the law again. But yeah, we have big plans. we just have to probably wait until next year to get it all going again.
And then just a question from my side. I think we all know, and I think we spoke about it earlier as well, that the people with intellectual disability that are in prison are vulnerable. I think Prof Kaliski mentioned it in the first presentation as well. Under that program that you people are currently running, how easy is it for you to get correctional services to sort of put people with ID that are vulnerable, either in the hospital section or in single cells? How easy is it to do that?
So just from the couple of clients we have had, for example, at Paulsmoor, if they have a psychiatric diagnosis, it is a little bit easier, I think, because they need to be on medication to move them to the hospital section. I haven't yet had a client who has intellectual disability, for example, that's perhaps not on any medication where they've been able to move them. But definitely there have been a few cases where, because we've informed Paulsmoor that this person does have a diagnosis, they are on this medication or need to be on this medication, but they have moved them to the hospital section so that they are able to get their medication. Otherwise, if they were stable on their medication, they go back to their other general sections, but they do keep a very close eye on them because it is known that they have a diagnosis. So I wouldn't be able to say how easy it is for a person with just intellectual disability, because I haven't come across a case like that yet.
Sure. All right, thanks. So I see Carol Bosch, our Deputy Executive Officer from Cape Mental Health, is going to provide us with some more clarity around the intermediaries. You're welcome, Carol. Thanks.
Good afternoon, everybody, and thank you very much for giving us this opportunity to inform you about the SAFE program. We're very excited about it, and well done to Sarah for doing an excellent job in terms of the presentation. Just to add in terms of intermediaries, so the intermediaries are the people that would sit with the client. Once it's been established, the person can testify in a separate room. So it would be separate from the court. And so it's only the intermediary that would hear what would be going on in the court, and would then relay questions that is asked by either the prosecutor or the defense attorney, but would simplify it for the person with intellectual disability. So I think it's very important. I mean, Sarah has alluded to the fact that for people with intellectual disabilities, they would require certain accommodations. And one of the accommodations that normally our psychologists would request is the use of an intermediary to make things, to simplify the questions, because I mean, I would get confused sometimes if I had to be asked a question in open court. So I think, and very often defense attorneys use that as a way to make the person seem as if they're not trustworthy or they're confused. And so I think it's important that the intermediary is there to simplify the questions. I also think that this has allowed a lot of our clients to be able to tell their stories by simply not being in open court, also having the assistance. So the intermediary is simply there just to simplify the question and make it possible for the person to be able to be meaningfully involved in this case and being able to answer the questions.
Great, thanks so much, Carol. So our time for this session is up. We've got our Professor Sharon Kleintjes, the Vera Grover Chair, who's going to be presenting a summation of all the presentations we've had thus far this morning. So can we have Sharon? Thank you. We can't hear you, Sharon. Still can't hear.
Can you hear me now?
There you go. Thank you.
We're in a group here, so we're just sorting out our sound, so you don't have that feedback. You could just give us a moment. And then screen share. So first, let me say what an exciting conference we've had this morning. You can't hear. Can you hear, Maryam?
Yes, we can, Sharon. Thanks.
Yes, great. What a fabulous and exciting conference we've had this morning, just hearing all these voices and bringing all this expertise into one space, which I hope is going to result in us having, as our one speaker said, dialogue is so important. And this dialogue, I hope, is going to be the beginning of a dialogue between us, not just in our provinces, but across the country. So I've got 8 or 9 points, which is just going to highlight the key areas that myself, Fatima, and Tony thought are the big areas that we've covered. They will seem very thin, but behind each one is a lot of detail. We are hoping to take all the notes from the various sessions that we've made, as well as the presentations from various speakers, and put it into a written form, which we can then circulate to participants for further comment. But just to get the conversation started for the last half hour of our first part of our conference, let me get to the few points that we've come up with. So firstly, we thought that an overarching important area would be the ethical framework that we adopt for our forensic service. We've spoken about the United Nations Conventions of the Rights of Persons with Disability. We've spoken about the African Charter on Disability and other regional African documents which inform our work and how we view disability in South Africa. We've had provocative comments about us perhaps needing to consider African conceptualizations of human rights within the framework of Ubuntu, which appealed to me greatly. And then we've also had a presentation on the theories informing our perceptions on the drivers of offending behavior. And I think all of those things need to be thought through so that we come up with a common ethical framework for working with people with intellectual disability and specifically people with forensic disability, forensic needs. I think we've also highlighted in at least 2 presentations the need for and the right of people with intellectual disability to be part of the dialogue that we are having. And we need to find innovative ways to include their perspectives if we are going to work ethically. We have had the Human Rights Commission publish in last year, in March 2019, the report on the status of the mental health services in the country. And each province and national is called to look at the forensic services. So let us be part of actioning that, that report starting today and moving forward. Then a very key theme was the need for legislative review. We spoke about how outdated legislation remains a barrier to modern service delivery in certain areas, even though there have been some innovations more recently with people on the school driving that. We've also noted that it's not only a barrier to service providers within the health and social services framework, but also to colleagues working within the justice system who have to make decisions about how to promote the rights and recovery opportunities for offenders with ID. Then the big debate around the ongoing use of mental age and the requirements through the law that we come up with IQ scores. How do we inform this? And if we do, what appropriate functionality and context-based assessments can replace mental age? I think that's a big area of work for us to be looking at. And then overall, legislative review must link changes. The changes that are effected to legislation must be in the interest of patient rehabilitation needs and needs for recovery and reintegration into, communities with everybody else as far as that is possible. And then we spoke about policy review. Eva mentioned the investment case for mental health, which I'm happy to use, including persons with disability. And I hope that we will also be able to input to that with regard to people with intellectual disability, because even in the disability field, physical disability is the mainstream. Mental health, it has a toehold in there somewhere, but people with intellectual disability is not even in the room. And I'm glad to hear that there's still opportunity for us as a collective to input to the review of the National Mental Health Policy, which is in its conclusion here at this stage. Then the next theme was the service framework. And I think the big message that's coming through is that we actually need to establish a national forensic service. And it should be based on what our patients need in terms of rehabilitation. In the various contexts. We need to remember that there's a lifespan approach. The needs of children and adolescents with offending behavior is not something we've spoken about in a great deal, but there is a need for that. And then how do we address resource constraints in this framework? Do we need to develop minimal service norms and standards to inform, given that various provinces have different resource envelopes, but that, equity is important in service development? How do we make sure that we don't forge ahead in some provinces and leave others behind, in terms of available resources? How do we put our heads together to work on that? And then the need, very strong theme in the conference, is the lack of community-based services and family supports, and the need to move from a purely, as Eva said, the only option we have is hospital care. How do we expand over that? And just to say, this might sound like a long headache, but if we remember 15 years ago, we were saying, how do we get people with psychosocial disability or mental disability out of the hospitals into the communities? People say we'll never have regional psychiatric hospital centers, and 20 years later we do have them. So this is not a 5-minute job, but today is the day to start, so that we can move from hospital-based to community and family-based services in line with international best practice. Then we were debating briefly, and we need more talk around, should it be an integrated specific service within the overall service for mental health and intersectorally versus a siloed service? I think we all know that silo is a dirty word nowadays in our resource constrained environment. So I'll put a challenge out to everybody that I'm not in favor of the siloed approach. But we need to engage and hear what people are saying and what we can come up with. All of this needs to be evidence and expertise informed. What are the best practices locally and internationally that can inform a comprehensive service framework in our context? And then, I think we are in the habit of putting up facilities, but facilities are only as good as the human beings that enter them. for services and to provide services. So we should not forget to be looking at who we have available and what training and upskilling is going to be needed across sectors, not just in the health service. And I've already mentioned the importance of equity in that service development. Then programs, and the key point that's come out here is fit for service programs for rehabilitation, whether we are going to have a separate service, which I don't think we'll ever have, or an integrated service with a specific program for people with intellectual disability. It's got to be suitable for their needs. We can't continue to use programs that have been developed for neurocognitively typical people when these programs go over the heads of our clients with intellectual disability. How do we adapt best practice locally and internationally for those programs? And I think we've, in Sarah's presentation, seen that there is a lot of good work going. The SAVE program, the Access to Justice program. This particular mini conference didn't allow us to invite colleagues to share their best practice, but that might be a topic for a further engagement. And then importantly, a couple of presentations mentioned the importance of looking at diversion programs outside of our current send them to the forensic hospital kind of approach that we're having. The next point is not happening. Let me see. Nikita, am I not pressing hard enough on your laptop here? For the next point? Okay, thank you. Let's just move this little thingy out of my way. Okay, so the next point is partnerships. And again, the word dialogue came up, and I think as we are listening to each other, we are growing, spider webs out from our individual, our sectoral perspectives to network across ourselves. And this is what we need to do. We need to actually take our different legislative policies, services, and clinical expertise perspectives and try and develop a mutual cross-sectoral understanding of the landscape of forensic or offending ID service development, which involves all of those departments and more. And then a key issue that came up in partnership development is that we do need more than just the health and social services sectors involved if we are going to move to prevention and pre-offending behavior programs so that we, prevent people from even needing to come into the services that we're discussing today. And then a research agenda. We have clinical researchers in the room, the virtual room. We have researchers who are working purely as researchers. And I think if we've been listening today, the research agenda is clear. There's the ethics of care. There's many aspects of a service framework that we need to work on. There is partnerships for service development and how that would work so that, as one speaker said, clients do not continue to fall through the gaps. There's a need to look at the assessments of ID, and then also what would fit for purpose rehabilitation programs look like. And I'm sure you can think of other issues that I've left off this research agenda, which we have discussed this morning. And a related issue is in trying to include our areas of inquiry into existing information system. Eva spoke about the need for several audits. Sean did as well, others have as well spoken about the need to have proper data to inform planning. And then if once we've planned, how, to also monitor and evaluate those services. So for now, that's just the points that we've come up with. And I invite people to use the rest of the time to add or to amend those ideas that we've come up with as we look to how we're going to take ourselves beyond this meeting today. Thank you. Back to you, Maryam.
Thanks so much, Sharon. I'm watching the chat. There aren't many comments as of yet, But I just want to say thank you so much to yourself and Tony and Fatima for doing the scribing and the summation. I think you've pulled it all together quite well, and I think our work is cut out for us really. And I hope that following today, it's not just going to be a dialogue, that we're going to all be able to get stuck in and progress in this front.
It would be great if in the remaining time, if people had ideas, you know, how we could move forward, what they thought, if we could just innovate and think through, you know, what it is that we want to do. And okay, thank you. I'll shut up now, Maryam.
Dr. Malutsi's suggested that we add advocacy and public awareness programs on ID. Thank you, Dr. Malutsi, for that. Anybody else? Nothing else so far. Sharon?
So besides adding additional topics to the conversation, if there's anyone on the call who you know, thinks there's something we haven't dealt with or has an idea around moving forward, you know, most welcome now to you know, raise your points.
Telemeans and digital platforms, Dr. Malutsi suggesting that as well. And we've got a suggestion as well around why not asking our B-Psych practicum students to assist with psychoeducation in terms of all the resource constraints that people have been referring to. We can add that as well. Anything else from your side, Peter?
No, nothing.
The points that I summarized, are there any of the presenters who feel I've missed out an important area that we should add?
Chair, from my side, I think, Sharon, you have covered almost everything that has been said, except the additions that I made. And I wanted to talk more about the use of telemeans and digital platforms, because we've got various innovations in place now, for example, the use of Vula apps and all that. So I think that can really help a lot if we can also use the opportunity that is created by COVID-19 pandemic, because it has really pushed us out of our comfort zones to try to think out of the box. And I think the system is open now for us as mental health care practitioners to come up with innovative ways of how we can suggest to the system, particularly to the criminal justice system, the best ways that we can work together and collaborate. So I think the use of telemeans, digital platforms, it's another system that we can use. The HPCSA gave us green light on that. We can use that. I think Justice, if he's still here, Justice Saldana can provide some light if we can do those tele-assessments for forensic observations, and then whether the courts will query or not accept the reports. And also if we can also try to link our clinicians through this means to provide expert evidence, particularly from rural areas. I think that will really help a lot. So those are my inputs, Sharon, on the discussion. Thank you.
Thank you, Eva.
Thanks, Dr. Sharon, in addition to that, I'm aware that I know some of our colleagues from the national hospitals in forensics are also tuned in. And I think one of the things that came up for me was also about standardizing our methods of assessment so that we can clear some of the gray areas that Judge Saldana also spoke to, where I don't know that we're all assessing people that we suspect as having ID in the forensic system, you know, on a standardized sort of platform. So maybe inviting them for some collaborative discussions around how we actually do those assessments.
I see a comment from Bev in the chat, and I'm not sure, Bev, if you would be willing to just speak to that on camera. We seem to be able to sustain a few cameras on. Are you open to that, Bev? You just unmute your camera and speak to your point.
Yes, thank you so much, Sharon. Yes, I mean, there's been so much here. I've really found it absolutely fascinating. And I think this whole area of interdisciplinary discussion is absolutely fascinating. I think it's really useful for us as psychologists to engage with legal personnel and to have to actually, you know, clarify our thinking and be very clear. What do we mean by consent? What do we mean by competence? You know, it's a fabulous discipline for us. And to engage in a really helpful and comprehensive way with what is needed of us in court. And I'd be very happy to take this further. And I would love it if I could engage with some of the legal people who are here and present some of the things I've written in various fora and ask for their comments. I would find that so helpful, because it's not always easy, you know, as Dr. Smith was saying, you know, very often our engagements are in the courtroom. And I would so value people's comments to take my own thinking further, and I would be very available in whatever forum there is to try and think of how to be useful, how to take this further, both within our own, you know, within mental health profession and across disciplines, to think of how to clarify these issues so that some of these stumbling blocks are removed, because they actually can be, I think, quite easily.
Yes. Well, thank you so much for that hands up to take, you know, to have further dialogues. And I think just Eva's point about using these platforms, I'm sure there are many conversations we can have post this meeting. So thanks for that first hands up, Bev. Bev, you didn't actually, and we didn't introduce you. I think we know you here in the Western Cape very well, and some of the audience may. But if you could place your offer of dialogue into the context of the work that you're doing in the area, I think that would also help.
Well, I'm just doing bits of writing at the moment, really. I'm in private practice, but for many years I worked at Cape Mental Health Society. Yes. I was there, in fact, for 30 years, and for 20 of those years I was involved in the psycholegal project, which became known as the SAVE project. But my goodness, there's Anthony Pillay, who we're going to hear from. There are other people in other parts of the country who've done amazing work as well, and in different models from the Cape Mental Health Society model. So I think it's going to be really important to hear from them as well. So that's my background, really. And then I'm also particularly interested in the whole area of ethics and disempowered groups, particularly, and the whole question of citizenship, actually, and particularly in the area of the law, and how we have to be careful as psychologists working in this area and writing these reports from the best will in the world, to be very careful in our report writing, not to inadvertently undermine citizenship rights, actually, which we can do quite easily, actually, in how we present people. We've got to be very, very careful ourselves in how we actually characterize people and their difficulties, and make sure we balance it with their strengths or potential strengths and their potential for growth.
Thanks so much, Bev. Yes, I think just you've reminded me of another point I wanted to make in terms of evidence. And I think, you know, there's a whole lot more evidence than we think from local writers on the score. Publications that we could, research has been done over a couple of decades on intellectual disability and forensic intellectual disability. So I think we're in a good place to start drawing that expertise together to inform the issues that we've raised in this meeting today.
Sharon, there was another comment reinforcing that, similarly to what Bev just said, that the magistrates and prosecutors are really amenable to engaging on how to improve services. So we just need to set that up, I think, and start engaging more with our justice colleagues in this regard.
Thank you so much for that comment. Maryam, I'm not sure how we're doing for time. I think people do need a bit of a break before the keynote.
So we do have a break. I'm just going to ask Dr. Smith to just give us an interim vote of thanks. Then we will go down to a slightly longer lunchtime break, followed by some more musical items from the Altered Toy School. The first one was from the band, and then they also have an after-school band. And I think, as everyone knows, or those colleagues who might not know, Altered Toy School is a school for learners that do have specific challenges. So one just gets to view their hidden talents, I guess, despite their various challenges. So Peter, it's over to you.
Yes, thank you very much. So there's several votes of thanks, I think, required. When we started out a couple of hours ago, we had quite a lot in mind to achieve. And I have a feeling that we have achieved much of what we had in mind when we started out. And for that, we have to thank several people. We have to thank our presenters, Professor Kaliski, Dr. Nagdi, Dr. Malutsi, Justice Saldana, and then Sarah Ntaka. I trust that I've mentioned all of our presenters. And of course, we have to be very thankful for the art that was placed on display. I'm not sure who those artists were, but I think that was much appreciated. But then a special thanks for the Altered Toy School Band. I think that they were really excellent, and I think that we all really owe them some gratitude for the great music that they presented for us. And then finally, to thank Prof Kleintjes and a little band of scribes, Tony Abrams and Fatima Ismail, for capturing those wonderful threads that were woven through the presentations today. I just want to also thank everyone who has attended. And I'd really like to encourage you to stay logged on for the keynote address, which will be presented in our usual lunchtime lecture slot at 12:30. So yeah, thank you very much.